Welcome back to Autodesk Maya. In this tutorial, we're going to explore how to create 3D type. In fact, we're going to continue this tutorial in future tutorials to create sort of rock texture in the type and composite in Photoshop. So it's a couple of tutorials. This is just the first one, but essentially what we're going to do is create unique type. So in order to create type, you just go to the Create menu and go down to Type and click on the word there, and it will load here. It's very small right now in my scene, so if I hit the F key, it'll frame in on it, and I can rotate around by holding out Alt and left clicking to rotate, again, and Alt right click to zoom in and out, and then Alt middle click of the mouse to pan if you remember your 3D navigation. So what we want to manipulate the type, which is what this tutorial is about, is you want to open up the attribute editor. We want to manipulate all the attributes. So the attribute tab is right here on the side here, and if you can't see it for some reason on the side, up here in the top you have the little widget that's vertical, sort of file structure widget. If you click on this, it'll also open and close this attribute editor. And then there's these tabs here, and you want to click on the one that says type 1. So make sure that's selected. So now what we can do is we can highlight the text that says 3D type, which is what's here, and we can rename it. So if I rename it Maya, for example, I can do that. In here I can choose different typefaces. So if I don't want this default, whatever one I have selected here, I can go through and check out whatever typefaces I have on my sheen here. I recommend actually sticking with something very generic. It doesn't have to be, pretty crazy in terms of the typeface. You can choose different things. You can see here Roman type has an error to it, so some typefaces might do that. So just go through until you find one you like. I kind of like the Minion Pro here. It has a little bit of serif quality here, and it looks pretty cool. You have the same attributes you have basically if you want to make it italic or bold, etc. in here. And then in here you can choose the type of language it is. I'm going to set it to any here. Now as I scroll down here, we have these little tabs inside this little attribute, which is text, geometry, texturing, and animation. We're going to go through the text attributes first here. We're not really going to cover the animation or the texturing, but we can, we can do it through here, but we're also going to just create our own text too, or texture in another tutorial. So let's deal with text here. So first thing is the alignment. It's basically to the left here. You can center it, for example, and you'll see it's now centered in the stage here. Let's see what we got. Font size, that just basically makes it bigger or smaller. So I can leave it at the default 20 here. And then tracking, basically just like in your vector programs, Illustrator, Photoshop. Well, Photoshop's not vector, but anything that deals with type, which is vector based, you can adjust the tracking. So tracking is the spacing between the letters, and you can kind of play around with that pretty much. The kerning has to do with just a couple letters, does the same thing. The leading scale you're not going to notice because we need another line of text to do that. And then there's a space width scale, which really doesn't do anything either. So we're going to leave this the default, and that's because we don't have another line of text here. Now the type manipulator, this is kind of interesting. Let's click on it. And what you basically do is you can click on any of these type here and adjust it. So for example, if you want to move the letter A up higher, you can do that. If you want to scale a particular type a little bit differently, you can. So you can grab the middle cube and it will scale uniformly. Go ahead, Command Z or Control Z on Mac to undo that. Or you can grab these other cubes to kind of scale and stretch. I'm not a big fan of text distortion, so I'm going to undo that action. I may, want to adjust the type a little bit and make it the spacing a little bit different. So sometimes this is kind of nice where you can click on, each sort of type and kind of manipulate how you want the type to go. You can see here that I can bring, for example, the M a little bit closer or a little bit farther away. I actually kind of like the way it is though, so I'm not really going to mess with it. But I just want to share what the type manipulator does, so just turn it off there. As I scroll down here, there's nothing else really. There's extra attributes there. The next tab is the geometry tab, and this is a real important one. This has to do with the extrusion and lots of other features here. So if I scroll down here, you'll see if this is collapsed, you can open it up by clicking a little arrow here. The extrusion has all these different profiles you can use. We're just going to leave the defaults and go over basically a couple of these features. So if we zoom in here, the extrude distance, basically as you drag this out, you can see the type actually goes out further based on that. Okay. The offset, what it does is it basically adjusts in terms of the extrusion. You don't really notice it about much. The only time you would notice it is if you were had a really small type extrusion like that, or yeah, pretty much that. It kind of goes inwards a little bit. So we're not going to change that value really too much. The extrude divisions though is very important, because as we add more of this, we essentially add more detail. Now it does take a little bit more time to render, but basically what it does, it divides the polygons a little bit more. I think 6 divisions will probably work pretty well. In fact, let's do a quick test render and see how this looks. So we can check out the render settings here by click on this little icon here. It has a little gear with the clapper. Click on that, it opens up the render settings. And in here, just want to make sure Arnold renderer is selected here. Basically using the default settings here, but the Arnold renderer, so the default is HD 540 right now. Again, this is just for quick testing. We'll adjust the render settings a little bit later. And then the second clapper here opens up the render view, and you'll see here what will happen is you basically get nothing. And the reason why is there's no light in your scene yet. You have to create a light in order to render out something. So let me minimize this and go to the create menu, choose lights, and I'm going to choose a directional light here. And then I'm just going to immediately hit W because I don't know where it's at until I do that, and then bring it up. And you can see it here if I scale it up a little bit by hitting R. You can see it's just a bunch of arrows. And what I want to do is sort of rotate it. So I'm hitting E, and I'm going to rotate it down a little bit. So the light's coming from the front here, so to speak. And now we can click on that second clapper and do a quick render preview. And what you're probably going to get is a mess like this, where you have the mesh really distorted. And it's very strange, and certain typefaces don't work really well in the Arnold renderer. Most of them don't. If we switch to Maya software and click render, you'll get a better preview. But I do want to use the Arnold renderer. So how do we resolve this issue with the basically tessellation that's happening here? Well, you can adjust it in the, let's click on the type again, in the type 1 module, which is under geometry here. And where it's at, it's a funky little area, but it's the mesh settings. If you twirl that open and scroll down, let me zoom out here a little bit. It's under deformable type. Twirl that open, and what you have to do is check this little box, deformable type. As soon as you do that, what it does, it subdivides this mesh and applies a lot of tessellation throughout and makes it renderable. So when I click on the second clapper, you'll see here that we got basically pretty good looking type. Now the resolution is not great wrapping around. You can see a little bit of, especially zoom in here on the A here, some issues with rendering. So that comes from right here, the curve resolution. So if I bump this up a little bit, I can bump it maybe to 6 and then click on it and render. Usually 6 works pretty well. 8's probably gonna be a little bit too much, but now we got nice smooth curves. We got pretty good shadows. Shadows are a little bit noisy, and that's due to the lighting. So if we click on the light here and scroll down, open up the shadows category and scroll down. Under ray trace, we have very low numbers here. I like to bump these up, so I'm going to type in 10, 10 here, and 10 here. So, or power to 10 here, and let's try another render. And you'll see we got much better, softer shadows overall. So what we can do now is also increase the render quality through our render settings. So let's click on the chain widget here. And what I want to do is, in there, the system sampling, we can increase this, and that would just give you a better preview render. And then under the Arnold render, we could pump up some of these here. But overall, it's pretty good in terms of the settings. The main thing we have to change is the resolution. So instead of 540, we could bump up to say 2K here and minimize, and then we'll click the little render tab here. And And I'm going to pause while it's rendering. It'll take a few more seconds to render here. So we're getting a little bit better render here, and what we want to do is essentially apply some texturing. Before we do that, I'd probably like to maybe apply a bevel to the type. Now, I don't know if it'll actually be visible in the final render once we apply textures, but I do like to share this. So we're going to just again click on the type, click on type 1 tab here, and it's under the geometry area. If you scroll down here, there's the extrusion we passed, and then right here it's the bevels. So you open that up, and in here we can do outer bevel, inner bevel. We're going to choose outer and then twirl up in that section. And then what you have to do is check this little box, enable outer bevel. Now we're going to zoom in here and see what's going on here in terms of this outer bevel. There's a couple different variables here. So the bevel distance is how far out it gets pushed out. And typically I like to keep this kind of on the thin side. It poofs out and distorts the geometry more if you have it out too far. So about there looks pretty good. The offset, that's how far the bevel angles downwards. So ramping this up will give you a stronger angle. Bring this down will almost have no bevel effect at all. So somewhere in between looks good. And then the bevel divisions is again has to do with resolution. So the more of these that you add, the higher and smoother that bevel will be, and the less will be a little bit more rough. I'm going to leave it at the default 4 and see how that looks. So pretty much we have a pretty good setup here. Now I may want to change the lighting. So typically I like to have 2 lights set up. So what I'm going to do is, since I have this one kind of set up, right, I'm just going to hit Control D or Command D to duplicate the light and move it over. And then I'm going to rotate it a little bit in a different angle here. And now if you want to see your light preview, you can hit number 7, and that will kind of show you interactive light here. And what I want to do now is reduce the intensity of the second light so it's not quite so strong. So it just adds a little bit of light, bounce light into those shadow areas. And yeah, so this is, we can do one more final render, check it out. But basically we have our type pretty much set up. You'll see here now we got some nice light catching those little bevels, and overall really good shadows. So yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with this type's coming out. So this will conclude the first tutorial in the type, creating sort of rocky type in Autodesk Maya. In the next tutorial we will explore how to actually apply a texture to this type, and then we'll eventually bring it into Photoshop for compositing. So until then, see you soon. Cheers.